Ian King, Bloomberg. Intel cuts employee pay and perks to preserve cash for investment, ranging from 25% for CEO Pat Gelsinger, 15% for leadership, and 5% for mid-level managers. You were looking for the examples of why we think of Intel as Intel, why those of us who are of a certain age consider them to be sort of a venerable business and one that should continue to exist. Here's an example. Leadership that instead of cutting headcount, they instead cut compensation. The employment for all of the leadership and mid-level managers still exists. Those people are free to decide that doing their job for 5 or 15% less in comp is no longer a good deal for them and they want to go somewhere else. But no one was shown the door in order to save costs on headcount. And the fact that all of these massive scale tech companies have laid off the number of people that they have, both individually and in totality, as opposed to doing something that is as obvious as saying, we need to preserve capital as an organization. Paying people less is a way to do that. And don't get me wrong, it would not surprise me if someone who took a 5% or a 15% haircut has gone directly to their manager and demanded a conversation to argue against the notion that they should be paid less. They have employment contracts. Great. But is this not the more humane way to deal with preserving capital if you're a business, as opposed to having to have people queue up outside of the office on a Monday morning and try their badge, and if you get a green light, you still have a job, but if you get a red light, you don't? This seems more humane. Ryan Brown, CNBC. The UK government lays out plans to regulate crypto, including measures to strengthen rules for lending, disclosures, financial intermediaries, and custodians. Crypto Malarkey, Regulators edition. No. Tom Warren, The Verge. NVIDIA is working to fix a Discord bug that slows the memory clocks on some of its GPUs by up to 200 megahertz, including the RTX 3080 and the RTX 3060 Ti. I don't know if Ti refers to titanium like it would on the periodic table or something else. The notion that a bug in Discord is causing a slowdown in NVIDIA GPUs and that's NVIDIA's job is interesting. I don't know how material 200 megahertz slowdown is for GPU like the RTX 3080, so I can't really comment in a meaningful way. Jennifer Elias, CNBC. Sources and documents. Google asks employees to test potential ChatGPT competitors, including Apprentice Bard, a chatbot that uses its Lambda conversational tech. So Google has moved from the public perception or the public statement that they've made being, we're not sure it's ethical to put this technology into the market, to internally testing its competitors. That would indicate that they feel some pressure to bring something to market. The more interesting thing, though, to me that isn't covered here, but Antonio Garcia Martinez mentioned on the, I think the most recent episode of Moment of Zen, it's not clear what the product is here. And while there's a tremendous amount of exciting demonstrations of the capability, if you're a business like Google, you have to ask yourself, is there a clear enough way to employ this technology to move the growth needle such that we should put resources against it in order to bring something to market? Or again, more simply put, the technology is great. If we can't build a product with the technology that will be successful by our own internal definition of successful as Google, why would we put the energy into bringing it to market? I think that's an interesting point of view and an interesting question to ask. Certainly, one could argue a consequence of growing so large as a business is the scale of success that any of your major investments have to have in order for it to be worth it to bring those products to market. That can be a barrier, right? And it can allow younger, smaller, hungrier, less constrained businesses to create disruptive things. Google search disrupted an entire field of searchable indexes of what was on the web. How did they do it? They built an algorithm which is not particularly complicated, but was exactly what you needed for the flywheel of, oh, I'm getting higher quality responses, or for whatever other less defined reason as a user, I like using Google more, therefore I'm going to keep using it and I'm going to stop using other things. In so doing, I'm feeding Google more information about what I'm interested in, which not only improves the PageRank model, because it's not just me, it's every user of the product, but also provides information about what the interesting queries are for people, users like me, right? Like that's how the Google search product disrupted all of the other existing indexes. And so while they're putting a lot of energy, it would appear, behind trying to compete with the ChatGPT product, the question that Antonio raised, I think, is still very much outstanding. Where's the product? Where's the thing that is sticky enough and useful enough that users at scale will employ it to do a job beyond, look at this cool science experiment that I'm able to run against this conversational AI? David Satin, the streamable. Netflix lists its rules and exemptions to prevent password sharing, including that all devices should be on the same quote-unquote primary Wi-Fi network at least once every 31 days. That on the surface seems quite accommodating, it seems as well. What's more striking to me is the notion that these rules and exemptions for the same account, we talk about password sharing, but what we're really talking about is sharing of identity, right? I have an identity in the system that has a billing instrument attached to it. It has a name and an address attached to it. It has an avatar attached to it. When I log in to a Netflix endpoint with my username and password, and then I leave it there for other people to use, my identity is still residing there. So for me, that's a more accurate description of what password sharing is trying to capture. But the fact that these rules are going to be apparently quite transparent is interesting, if only because I think it indicates a sort of spirit of Reed Hastings ethos, which is being punitive should not be our goal, right? Our goal should be to continue to win in the market because we're offering the superior experience. How much of money we're not taking in as a business because multiple people are all using the same identity in order to watch stuff, maybe we can deal with that by slowly boiling the frog, as it were, and raising the price of the service, right? I don't have a 4K display, but my understanding is that the 4K capable Netflix SKU is $20 a month. If that gets to 22 and then to 24, then to 26 over time, something tells me that at a macro level, one could make the argument that we're capturing enough revenue by slowly increasing the price until we reach some measurable ceiling, and that would be a better thing to do for our customers than to begin to police what they do with their identity that in exchange for $20 odd a month gives them access to this library of content and the experiences. So I'll be interested to see what happens as this gets implemented. Jason Schreier, Bloomberg, a look at Microsoft's prized 343 Industries, the studio behind Halo, after a leadership overhaul, layoffs, and more. Sources detail a pivot to Unreal Engine. I'm not familiar with what else the 343 studio produces. It's possible that they're responsible exclusively for Halo. I'm sure it has continued to be the tentpole title for the Xbox platform, and so probably warrants having a dedicated studio that doesn't have to think about any other projects. The notion that that studio is changing as a result of a major overhaul, I mean, I think the writing's on the wall there. The latest iteration of Halo attempted to provide the same sort of free-to-play experience that Fortnite and I believe Call of Duty also now offer. I don't know, because I don't move in gaming circles, whether or not that's been successful. What is, I think, the open question for the studio before we get to the engine piece, which is, I think, part of the iceberg that's below the surface, is the Halo brand valuable enough that we'll just continue to see Halo games in the traditional sense of this is a AAA title and you're going to pay $60, $100 in order to play it, and it's going to provide, 50 odd hours of entertainment over the course of the core narrative, and I'm sure ancillary stuff as well. Will that continue to happen? Right? Because it's not cheap. Like, my understanding is AAA titles are approaching $100 million per in terms of capital that you have to invest in order to produce the finished product. I could be off, could be, but I feel like I've seen 50 as a number in the past. But all that aside, pivoting to Unreal Engine, that's an interesting thing, because if you're writing to someone else's engine, there are advantages and disadvantages there, right? The advantages are you get to recapture a significant percentage of your team resources. You're no longer building your own engine. And so you could invest those resources in better story construction, better art, more narrative, other aspects of creating a compelling AAA game. You also get to benefit from the people that build the engine producing a state-of-the-art engine, because they're investing more in engine production than you were, right? For example, to look at Microsoft Game Studios as an umbrella, to my knowledge, there's not a shared engine for, say, Halo and Forza. And I have no doubt that anyone who is more versed in game engineering than I am will gladly beat me over the head with all of the reasons that those things, that's not possible, right? That the type of gaming engine you need to build to make Forza as good as it can be is different enough from what you would need for Halo to be as good as it can be, that you effectively can't share those things. But again, as a layperson, I can't help but come back and say, both of these things are attempting to simulate reality. Isn't that what the gaming engine does? Isn't that what Unreal Engine does? Every time there's a major tech demo of Unreal Engine, they're not showing you how the running and jumping and shooting at the bad guys is better. They're showing you their ability to render the real world, or a real world, a photorealistic environment. So I think that's the obvious benefit to 343, is let's go with the engine that is clearly the market leader. The downside there is you no longer have control, right? You're limited to, in terms of what you can render to, you're limited by what Epic is willing to allow you to do within the confines of the Unreal Engine. Good news is it'll take a long time for us to see whether or not that was this is a smart bet or not. Nilay Patel, The Verge, an interview with Chris Miller, a Tufts professor and author of the book Chip War, on EUV lithography, ASML's role in global chip manufacturing, TSMC, and more. Related, Politico, sources: the UK's semiconductor plan, which missed a publication deadline last fall, has suffered from government disarray as the US and EU move forward. Sounds like a book worth reading, at least for me, because my understanding of the semiconductor industry is limited, and chips, quote Wu-Tang Clan, rule everything around me. So Patel's interview, probably worth a listen, and Miller's book, probably worth a read. This related story, though, about the UK having a semiconductor plan and how that plan has yet to be published, that's an interesting example, it would appear to me, to support the argument from industry, which is when you regulators enforce particular ways of doing business on us, private enterprise, you mess things up. I'm reminded when Joanna Stern was interviewing Craig Federighi and Greg Joswiak, and she asked the question about complying with the European Union's regulation that effectively the iPhone regulation doesn't specify the iPhone, of course, but that the iPhone must move to USB-C because USB-C will be the regulated standard for charging devices. The example that Joswiak cited of why this often doesn't go well is hearing aid compatibility with smartphones. And he told a story, which is his interpretation of the story. He's obviously biased, yada, 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 where the existing specification produced a terrible user experience. And so instead of abiding by the specification, they abided by the spirit of the regulation, rather, which is if you wear a hearing aid, it should be able to interface with your smartphone. And they, Apple, developed their own implementation, which proved to be a superior experience. The United Kingdom having a particular plan that would govern the semiconductor industry's behavior in the United Kingdom, I mean, it's all right here in the headline. The government, which is responsible for producing that regulation, is incapable of doing it. And so as a result, it would appear that the United Kingdom's semiconductor participation in the global semiconductor industry is out of step with its competitors. That's not good. Ashley Kaput, CNBC. PayPal plans to lay off around 2,000 employees, or around 7% of its workforce, quote unquote, over the coming weeks, as the company addresses the, quote, challenging macroeconomic environment, end quote. That is, I don't know, I don't think there's a tremendous amount to say that I didn't already say relative to Intel's announcements, except that the absence of humanity that continues to be the common theme amongst all of these business decisions, which is, let's just remove people from our employ because the macroeconomic environment is difficult. There are other things that you could do. Intel's shown that you could reduce the compensation amongst your most highly compensated people in your workforce. But PayPal is choosing to do what has been shown over the last 6 months to be the more popular thing, which is, we no longer require your services. Lame. Jamie Crawley, CoinDesk. Indiana-based blockchain startup Simba Chain, which has worked on various U.S. military projects, raised $30 million from the U.S. Air Force after raising $1.5 million in 2020. That's, I suppose, the Pentagon's prerogative to take its share of the tax revenue, which comes from us, the taxpayers of the United States of America, and direct it into investments in new technology for military application. We wouldn't have the internet were it not for that. We wouldn't have computing machines were it not for that. So I'll button it up and simply say, I'm not willing to call this crypto malarkey because there are a lot of things that the Pentagon knows that I don't. So maybe we'll hear more about Simba chain in the future. Ashley Gold, Axios, a report by the White House's NTIA describes Apple and Google as, quote, gatekeepers of mobile app stores and suggests legislation to improve competition and choice. I'm going to assume that this is the response that the White House is offering to the request from the Supreme Court for the executive branch's point of view on the case against, is it the antitrust case against Google, or is it the case that the court is hearing that revolves around Section 230? I think it might be the latter, but uncertain. Are they gatekeepers of their app stores? Yeah. They run the app stores. I mean, this point of view is, I can't get away from the idea that it is naive. Should these businesses be able to charge the rents that they charge today? Perhaps not. Perhaps some legislation should govern the limit of fees that they can charge or rents that they can seek associated with owning and operating the app stores. But this idea that in principle they shouldn't be allowed to control what is offered in their stores, which in this circumstance means what software can be run on the devices that their platforms operate on top of, I just don't really buy that. Like, should there be a way to legally jailbreak an iPhone or a Pixel phone? Yeah, probably. There should probably be a route where you can tick all of the boxes and read all of you're on your own, nobody's going to come to save you, this device is now utterly exposed to any executable code that can land on its disk by any means. Yeah, that's a pathway that should probably exist for these products. But the issue here is that this notion that they're gatekeepers and that it's anti-competitive, it completely ignores the fact that for over 90% of the user base of these devices, it is a better experience which has enabled more variety and growth and evolution in what the devices are capable of doing for their users than the Wild West could ever hope to. It's important that when you go to spend money, right, when you go to authorize a piece of software to talk to your payment instrument on an Apple device, that the operating system controls that experience, nobody else. If that's not considered a part of the experience of interacting with the device, I don't know what is. And this argument that like there should be other app stores, like, maybe, but in a world where you can go to the Apple App Store to get software for iOS devices or Apple devices, And then you can also go to Uncle Bezos's everything store to get software that runs on Apple devices. Who do you, as an end user, seek compensation from when a purchase made from Uncle Bezos's everything store results in moderate to catastrophic loss of funds or compromising the information that is housed in your device, or any other scenario that's possible when you start to loosen up the guardrails around the operating system being mated to the thing that provides software to run on top of that operating system. It's an area of great debate. I do hope that some legislation suggestions include attempting to seek a sort of maximum threshold for rent seeking. But if we look in a completely different market for consumer choice, the credit card market, there's not a lot of guardrails to protect the average person in America from winding up in severe debt because they have access to credit. So I'm not sure that there are a tremendous number of positive examples of legislation's ability to protect individual welfare. Lauren Forrestal, TechCrunch. Apple launches its MLS Season Pass in over 100 territories, giving soccer fans access to all MLS matches, playoffs, and more for $14.99 a month or $99 a year. Related, Jerry Smith, Bloomberg, sources, as Apple launches MLS Season Pass, the company is shopping ad packages for up to $4 million per season without guaranteeing advertisers' viewership numbers. I'm psyched for this. I am deeply convinced that America should learn to love soccer, and this is I think, a significant piece of that puzzle, which is when Major League Soccer was shown on any other network, it had to get scheduled around every other sport. And that's not we can't use this arena at this time because it's currently being used to play baseball or American football. That's what time is the game going to be played relative to when it can be aired as compared against when all of the other sports are on the same network. It's a clumsy way to describe it. Let me try it a little differently. Basketball, American football, baseball, the sports themselves have become compatible with advertising because they take breaks. Every N number of minutes, the game stops. And the players, in some cases, literally stand on the field while advertising is played. You can't do that in soccer. The game doesn't allow it. And so you can't advertise, you can't sell as much advertising opportunity against a soccer match as you can against all of these other sports. And so if you're NBC or ESPN or ABC or Fox, do you really want to give prime viewing time, right? Like, I don't know, Friday at 8 p.m. or whatever the right number is, Saturdays at noon? Do you want to give those times to a sport that you can't sell as many ad slots against as compared to all the other ones? No, Apple doesn't have that problem. And so I'm hopeful that they can do a couple of things. One, they can create a cohesive strategy about when Major League Soccer games take place and do that over a long enough period of time that it gets sufficiently baked into American culture that the people that want to watch the best people playing soccer in America can craft their life around that experience, because it's a real-time experience. Watching a soccer game that was played 3 days ago is fundamentally not the same as watching a soccer game that's happening in real time. So I'm hopeful they can solve that thing. The second thing that they can solve, which speaks to this related story, is somebody's got to figure out how to sell advertising in a better way than it is currently being done in the other markets where soccer is played, football. And so the notion that Apple is pricing advertising packages without providing viewership numbers, of course they're not going to provide viewership numbers. It would be ludicrous to provide viewership numbers. They hold the exclusive rights to this league playing this game that every other country in the world plays, as opposed to a lot of the other games that capture American television viewership. They're going to price the advertising and then hopefully use their lens of better living through software to innovate on the advertising experience that is provided. So I'm super psyched for Apple getting into this space and for what I think it portends with regard to Americans learning to appreciate a game that is played by, again, more people on earth than any other game, as much as we appreciate all these games that effectively are only played in America. So Kim, Bloomberg, as memory prices plunge, SK Hynix reports around a $1.4 billion Q4 operating loss, its biggest quarterly operating loss yet, versus an estimated $900 million loss and a 38% year-over-year drop in revenue. Yikes. If you're in the market for memory, now's a good time to buy. Kif Leswig, CNBC. AMD reports Q4 revenue up 16% year over year to $5.6 billion versus $5.5 billion estimated. Net income down 98% year over year to $21 million, and client segment revenue down 51% year over year due to weak PC chip sales. You took in $21 million in revenue in an entire quarter, and your AMD, not to keep referring back to the Intel story about cutting compensation, but how many people at AMD have a total comp that's greater than $21 million? Yes, it's an annual number versus a quarterly number, but like, let's just, for the sake of argument, grant the premise that there are that there's at least one person at AMD whose total annual comp is $21 million. Your entire income for 90 days is like 25% of your annual income at this kind of a run rate goes to paying for one person. Like, that's a bad sign. And yeah, like, AMD's revenue is not going to stay constant. This is a moment in time measurement. I get it. But man, the notion that all of these businesses thought that the buying behavior of the market over the previous 2 years was going to stick around. Like, if you didn't prepare for that and guide toward that, like, yikes. And again, my pet theory on all of this is, pandemic or no, the use cases of the average thing with an AMD chip in it, they just haven't evolved. And so why would you keep buying things with AMD chips in them at the same rate that you had historically if what you do with them has not changed in the way it had historically? Ben Lang, Road to VR. Meta's Ready at Dawn studio plans to shutter Echo VR, one of the best rated and most popular free Quest games, after layoffs, to focus on, quote, our next project. I don't imagine there's much of anything behind this story. They've got an in-house studio to produce applications that drive people to use their Quest VR headsets, and a game that is free, surprise, surprise, is popular and highly rated. Didn't cost anybody anything after buying the headset. They're not going to keep making it. Like, good for you. Go make something more interesting. Sylvia Varnum O'Regan, The Information. Sources: seeking to boost Reels' quality, Meta executives are leaning toward relaxing the company's long-standing opposition to sharing ad revenue with creators. Reels, of course, is a part of the Instagram family of experiences. Like, it's a struggle for me to refer to Instagram as an app at this point, because there's the algorithmic feed of posts, then there's the stories format, then there's the entire DM and messaging product. Like, it's evolving to a point where calling it an app is a struggle. It's a collection of experiences. Whether you want to call that an app, I suppose, is up to you. But this idea that they're relaxing their philosophical position that sharing the revenue they generate with advertisers who get to advertise against the content that people create, yeah, welcome to the party. Like, this is the whole ball game. You want to talk about why YouTube is YouTube? It's this. It's also network effects and economies of scale and performance efficiencies that Google threw at that product. But in terms of why it continues to be the thing, it's because the people that put stuff onto the platform have a clear road to earning some income for their effort. This is exactly where Twitter needs to get to, and the news from, I think, earlier this week that they're filing the first instances of the paperwork required with regulators in order to allow their users to trade currency, trade units of value, as opposed to just ideas and information. I think they're doing that. The part of that iceberg that's above the surface that everybody sort of scoffs at is, why would I want to use Twitter to exchange money with other users? I can use PayPal to do that. I can use Venmo to do that. I can use whatever I want to do that. Well, if I'm regularly creating content and publishing it to Twitter, or in this case, publishing it to Instagram, and some other set of parties are capturing value, earning revenue as a result of being able to put their advertising right next to what I put on the platform, am I not entitled to some compensation? Obviously not in the current edition of the end user license agreement, but yeah, like conceptually, absolutely. And so I think it'll be interesting to see over a multi-year timeline. I don't think you can turn and burn on something like this in less than 12 months. Is Instagram able to get to the type of relationship that YouTube has with a percentage of its creators faster than Twitter can? That is a race that I look forward to watching. Anna Nicolau, Financial Times. Sources: UMG is in talks with Tidal and others to overhaul streaming economics to pay artists more. Ideas include a, quote, bonus pool and, quote, superfan subscriptions. Isn't this why Tidal was created? For the record, I can't remember what the corporate structure is. I can't remember if Jack Dorsey now owns Tidal or whether Block owns Tidal, formerly Square. I think it's the latter, but that's not relevant here. The Universal Music Group, the largest cartel related to the commercial engine behind popular music, wants to overhaul streaming economics in order to pay artists more. And the two ideas that at least stood out enough to be put in the headline are a bonus pool and superfan subscriptions. I don't know what bonus pool would mean in that context. I mean, I suppose it's complete speculation, but if some artist has outsized success in a particular period of time, maybe they get a share from the bonus pool. That could be interesting. The superfan subscription, much more straightforward. If you're a total Swiftie, then maybe you do want to pay X number of dollars a month. But the question there again is, what do you get as the end user, right? Like Taylor Swift fans are known for buying the premium SKUs almost because they just like her as a human being. It strikes me as naive, but whatever, you do you. Are you going to subscribe to the artists you like? Perhaps, but again, I think you need meaningful utility. I would subscribe to a handful of bands that I really like if that subscription, let's say, ensured that I have a discounted rate to getting a ticket to one of their shows, or that I get access to the raw recording sessions in the course of producing new music, or some jam bands are good at this, Pearl Jam is good at this, merge those two. I get a copy of the professionally recorded, straight off the mixing desk, live performance of the show that I'm at, included with my ticket price. Like, this is a product that, it blows my mind, hasn't been in the market for over a decade at this point. I pay X number of dollars to go and see the show. Why can't I leave with a copy of the recording of that show? Like, put it on a USB stick, charge me another $20 if you need to, and let me walk out the door. Like, MP3 provides for this, and you can complain all you want about the recording quality. I don't care. Like, sell me an SSD that has like raw, ultra high quality, like WAV files on it, like whatever. But the fact that those types of product innovations on the experience of paying money to musical artists, the fact that that hasn't happened doesn't, to me, bode well for anything especially innovative to occur as a result of these talks between UMG and Tidal. But I'd love to be wrong. Sean Hollister, The Verge. Anker admits its Eufy security cameras are not natively end-to-end encrypted and produced unencrypted video streams for Eufy's web portal, but says the flaws are fixed. One of the unintended benefits of not being a homeowner is I have had very little motivation to get into the home surveillance category. We bought cameras in order to like keep an eye on a chicken coop that we had in a previous place that we lived, because raccoons and chickens, but we returned them as soon as we solved for how do we ensure that the raccoons can't get into the chicken coop. The notion that people are putting cameras inside their own home such that they can see the movements of themselves and the other people in their home, and that they don't have sufficient confidence that that footage is not easily compromised. Holy cow, like, what fresh hell are you living in if you are affected or were affected by this flaw in Anker's security camera products? Like, it's footage of you and your loved ones in your home, and it's housed on the network in such a way that total strangers can gain access to it. If that doesn't cause somebody who has owned these products to take a huge step back and say, what exactly is the utility of having cameras in my home recording 24/7? Is it worth it? I don't know what will. It's going to take somebody becoming like an accidental OnlyFans star to have that realization. God help you. Andrew Martin, Bloomberg, FS-ISAC report. DDoS attacks targeting banks and other financial firms had increased 22% year over year by November of 2022, particularly in Europe, where they rose 73% year over year. It's attractive to run the thought experiments of what might explain that increase. My first guess is the population of people who are capable of mounting a distributed denial of service attack has grown. The total addressable market of people with access to the tools and the skills to perform such an attack on a financial institution has increased over time. But beyond that, Kyle Wiggers, TechCrunch, Sentra, which classifies cloud data according to sensitivity and tracks cloud data security, raised a $30 million Series A led by Standard Investments. Okay, this smells more like a feature than a product or a company, but Taga Kenny Okafor, TechCrunch. Egyptian microfinance lending and payments service MNT Hyan raised $260 million in equity and $140 million in debt via bond issuances at around a $1 billion post-money valuation. Yeah, microfinance, lending and payments, moving over state-of-the-art networks. It's an important business. Tage Kenny Okafor, TechCrunch. Cape Town-based Lulalend, which uses its proprietary credit scoring algorithm to offer short-term loans to small and medium businesses, raised a $35 million Series B and launches a neobank. I don't know what a neobank is. Sure, we can figure that out. This story, though, this part about a proprietary credit scoring algorithm that is then used to offer short-term loans to small and medium businesses, that's interesting because we're becoming comfortable, finally, with the notion that there's not one algorithm, right? For a long time, there is a notion of one algorithm, right? There's one algorithm for search, or there's one algorithm for computing someone's lending score, right? Their value as someone to lend money to. So the idea that multiple businesses will begin to compete with their algorithms, I like, because I think it's a step in the right direction. I believe the ultimate direction, which is the algorithm, how a particular interface or user experience is mediated by an algorithm. That's a thing where there needs to be a market of options. And so I like seeing any example of where people are beginning to play with those opportunities. Casey Newton, platformer. Instagram co-founders Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger form a venture to explore next-gen social apps. The first is Artifact, a TikTok-like app for news articles. There will certainly be a lot of talk around this app because Kevin and Mike built the minimum viable version of one of the most popular apps ever, perhaps. The idea of a TikTok-like app for news articles, which I assume means providing you a feed of news articles and an interaction model similar to TikTok's for consuming or not consuming one piece of news or another. That's interesting. There's something interesting there. You can easily imagine the TikTok-like experience of you launch the app and you're immediately presented with a piece of content, and if you choose to stick around and consume it, you consume it, and if you don't, there's one gesture and then you're on to the next one, you're on to the next one, you're on to the next one. And most of the affordances traditionally found in software for navigating to one type of content or another, whether that's search or categories or a social graph, that those things are very much removed. That's the part of TikTok that grosses me out, because you're stripping away user agency in a sense. Like, obviously, every user has the agency to close the app and go do something else with their time. But to the extent that they're inside of it, to deprioritize their ability to say, I want to read about X versus Y, I just don't know that that's the type of software that I want to use. But maybe that's a sign of my age. Maybe that puts me in a particular cohort. It also strikes me, only other thing I think is worth saying, because to my knowledge, Artifact is not out in the wild by any stretch of the imagination, is this smells like the sort of thing Twitter wants to be. And so I'll be interested to see when Artifact gets out into the public, what overlap or sort of comparison, how it differs or is similar to Twitter. Twitter is, as I've continued to sort of call it, like the internet's chat room. This does not sound like a tool that is primarily there to facilitate conversation. And so they could be significantly different to the point where there's not a meaningful comparison to be made. Problem, of course, is that very few people are walking around with devices capable of having Twitter and something else open at the same time. So in that regard, I think you'll see some interesting competition. I may be even so bold as to say there's a non-zero chance, if this tool proves to have any sort of stickiness to its experience, that there's an attempt for Twitter to buy it, which obviously is gated and constrained by Twitter's current financial position. But I don't know, I can't help but think that these two entities are going to orbit each other fairly tightly as Artifact comes out